Here today we are going to see the game between Bassem, Amin and Transwrap. This was a computer of an ELO of 3755. No big deal, but after this he had a 300 point deficiency in 1 year. So this game was a draw and this was a 240 move game, not so long. Well, the game started with e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, knight takes on e5, d6, knight f3, knight takes on e4. Now knight c3, knight takes on c3, d takes on c3, bishop to e7, bishop to d3, castle, bishop e3, c5, c4, queen b6, queen c1, knight c6. Now developing the knight, c3, knight e5, knight takes on e5, f takes on e5, f3, bishop d7. Now castle, rook a d8. Well, the pieces swoop in, queen c2, f5, preventing them to advance on the queen side. Now rook to d2, bishop to e6, rook h2 d1, queen to c6. Very simple. So here well, after rook f2 d1, the both rooks double on the file and trying to play some kind of pins along this file. So well, now rook a d1 was played, and as you can see we are doubled and we have a clear threat of exchanging the pieces. So bishop f1, rook takes on d2, rook takes on d2, b6, b3, a6, a4, queen e8. Maneuvering going on here little bit. Now king to b2, and after king to b2, queen to e6, then bishop to d3, pinning the g6, the queen, and now the real game begins. So first things first, bishop to c8, queen to d1, queen to h5, queen to g1, rook to d8, bishop to c2, rook takes on d2, bishop takes on d2, bishop e6, bishop e3. Yeah, and well, now we see a series of forcing moves. a5, bishop d1, queen h4, bishop f2, queen g5, bishop e, queen f6, bishop c2, bishop d7, queen d1, bishop c6. Well, both the sides are running. So queen d2, g6, queen f2, king g7, queen d2, queen h4, g3, queen f6, f4, e4. Now you may have been understood why this game was a draw. h4, like well, black is like, I want to invade, like this. Now simple things. Well, firstly, black is trying to play some kind of like remove the queen to e6, then bishop to d1, bishop to f6, now bishop to e2, king to f7, and now king to c2, bishop to g7, then bishop to d1, king to e8, bishop to d7, bishop to e2, king to d8. Now for this is the move 44th, and well, to 90 he is just playing bishop f1, bishop e2, bishop f1, bishop e2, bishop f1, bishop e2. You will say, I mean. So bishop to e2, then king to c7, bishop to f1, bishop to e8, bishop to e2, then king to b7, bishop to f1, queen to f6, bishop to f2. Now the real game starts. Be ready for your journey to the 90th move. Are you ready? Let's be ready. Bishop to f1, queen to e6, bishop to e2, bishop to f6, bishop to f1, queen to f7, bishop to e2, bishop to d7, bishop to f1, king to c7, bishop to e2, bishop to c6, bishop to f1, bishop to b7, bishop to c2, queen to d7, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, bishop to g7, bishop to f1, queen to f7, bishop to e2, queen to e6, bishop to f1, queen e8, bishop to e2, queen f7, bishop to f1, queen e7, bishop to e2, queen e6, bishop to f1, queen to c8, bishop to e2, queen to f8, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, queen to e6, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, queen to f8, bishop to f1, queen to f7, bishop to f1, bishop to c6, bishop to f1, king to b7, bishop to f1, bishop to f6, bishop to f1, king to a7, bishop to f1, bishop to b7, bishop to f1, bishop to b8, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, bishop to c6, bishop to e2, king to b7. Oh my god, that was insane. And the position has not improved because there is no breakout. How will you break in this position? If you exchange the queens, then what can you do without a queen? Yeah, now after 6 moves the breakthrough is going to come. So again till there, bishop to f1, king to c7, bishop to e2, bishop to e8, bishop to f1, bishop to d7, bishop to e2, bishop to c6, bishop to f1, bishop to b7, bishop to e2, king to c8, bishop to f1, king to c7, bishop to e2, and finally h6. 90 moves done, and now, well, we are speeding up. Now, well, there is a rule that you can't play more than 50 moves without a pawn move or an exchange. Now we are speeding up the game to the move 189th because there is nothing left in there here. So will you try to make the journey? Let's go. Like in this game, nothing was played, just maneuvering, but the maneuvering doesn't lead to anything. So, well, we start our play by the awesome game. Let's fast forward our moves to the move 189. Are you? Shall we? Bishop to f1, bishop to c6, bishop to e2, king to b7, bishop to f1, king to a6, bishop to e2, king, bishop to b7, bishop to f1, king to a7, bishop to e2, queen to e7, bishop to f1, bishop to h8, bishop to e2, queen to c6, bishop to f1, queen to e8, bishop to e2, queen to f7, bishop to f1, bishop to d7, bishop to e2, bishop to c6, bishop to f1, queen to c7, bishop to e2, king to b7, bishop to f1, bishop to d7, bishop to e2, bishop to e6, bishop to f1, bishop to f7, bishop to e2, bishop to g8, bishop to f1, bishop to f6, bishop to e2, bishop to e7, bishop to f1, bishop to f8, bishop to e2, bishop to g7, bishop to f1, queen to c6, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, queen to f6, bishop to e2, queen to e8, bishop to f1, queen to f7, bishop to e2, bishop to e7, bishop to f1, queen to g7, bishop to e2, bishop to f6, bishop to f1, king to c6, bishop to e2, queen to f7, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, bishop to g7, bishop to f1, king to f7, bishop to f7, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, king to b7, and now finally bishop to e2, and then after 48 moves h5 was played. So one more pawn move, like this is a trick from the computer. It plays 48 moves, plays one move or captures. So now Be ready to speed up until the move 189th. Let's go, shall we? Alright. Bishop to f1, bishop queen to f6, bishop to e2, bishop to e6, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, queen to d7, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, bishop to f8, bishop to f1, queen to f7, bishop to e2, queen to g7, bishop to d1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, queen to f7, bishop to f1, queen to e7, bishop to e2, queen to g7, bishop to f1, queen to f7, bishop to e2, queen to g8, bishop to f1, queen to h7, bishop to e2, king to c6, bishop to f1, queen to c7, bishop to e2, bishop to f7, bishop to f1, bishop to e7, bishop to e2, king to c6, bishop to f1, bishop to e6, bishop to e2, queen to f7, bishop to f1, queen to f8, bishop to e2, queen, bishop to f7, bishop to f1, bishop to g8, bishop to e2, bishop to king to c7, bishop to f1, bishop to e6, bishop to e2, queen to f7. Finally, now the real maneuvering begins. So, okay, we are on move 179th, and here let the feast begin. So, this is the position. Now, firstly, bishop to f1, bishop to c6, bishop to e2, bishop to g7, bishop to f1, bishop to f6, bishop to e2, king to b7, bishop to f1, queen to g7, bishop to e2, queen to h8, bishop to d1, queen to f8, bishop to e2, queen to g8, bishop to d1, queen to d8, bishop to e2, queen takes on d2 check, king takes on d2. 189th move. Shall we speed up? Alright. So, well, 190, 240, I mean 50 moves, 51 moves probably. And after 51 moves, the game was agreed down, means 240. So, let's begin our journey. Okay. King to c7, bishop to f1, bishop to d7, bishop to e2, bishop to e6, king to f7, king to d7, bishop to e2, king to c6, bishop to f1, bishop to g8, bishop to e2, bishop to g7, bishop to f1, bishop to h7, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, king to d7, bishop to e2, king to e6, bishop to f1, bishop to g8, bishop to e2, bishop to h8, bishop to f1, king to f7, bishop to e2, king to e7, bishop to f1, king to d7, bishop to e2, king to c6, bishop to d1, king to d7, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, king to c6, bishop to e2, bishop to f7, bishop to f1, bishop to f6, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to d1, bishop to c6, bishop to e2, bishop to e7, bishop to f1, bishop to e6, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, bishop to king to c6, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to d1, king to d7, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, king to d7, bishop to e2, king to f7, bishop to f7, bishop to f1, bishop to f8, bishop to king to e7, bishop to f1, king to e6, bishop to e2, king to f6, bishop to f1, king to e6, bishop to e2, king to d7, bishop to f1, queen to king to c6, bishop to e2, bishop to e6, bishop to f1, bishop to e7, bishop to e2, bishop to d6, bishop to f1, bishop to d7, bishop to e2, bishop king to c7, bishop to f1, bishop to e7, bishop to e2, bishop to f6, bishop to f1, bishop to g7, bishop to e2, bishop to e6, bishop to f1, bishop to g8, bishop to e2, king to d7, bishop to f1, king to c6, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to f1, king to b7, bishop to e2, king to c7, bishop to d1, king to b7, bishop to e2, and finally the game ends in a draw. What a game by both sides. It was just awesome. Like, well, the whole game white moved the bishop. After the move number 44th, it waited on move number 189, then continued it to 240 and finally agreed a draw. Crazy game. I mean, how can such a side do something? Like this was a man versus machine encounter. The man played such stupidest moves that the machine plays. Like so I hope like this video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and bell icon. Thank you.